Welcome to Faith Positive Radio with Dr. Joey Fawcett, the Christian business coaching conversation that increases your faith with greater joy at work so you love God and others more. Dr. Joey interviews Christian business professionals just like you to discover their secrets for working faith positive in a negative world. Welcome to Faith Positive Radio with Dr. Joey Fawcett.
Faith Positive Nation, we live in a land of laws, and thank God for them, right? When the children of Israel first struggled out into the wilderness, they found themselves in need of some rules to live by. And those 10 commandments were handed down to Moses, and we've been enforcing law ever since, right? So it keeps us from running to each other on the highways and byways, and it keeps us from stealing from each other. And so we depend on the law. But moreover, we interpret the law, and we depend on people to interpret that law for us and to help us to understand it and to make sure that due process is followed in the law. And so we depend on judges, obviously, but we also depend on attorneys. And if you have ever been in a court of law, you know the value of an attorney, but moreover, you know the value of a Christian attorney. That is one who understands that he has a higher calling in his life and is ultimately answerable, if you will, to the judge and the jury, Christ himself. So today it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce to you a new friend of mine, Colby Warren. Colby is an attorney practicing in my home city of Danville, North Carolina, with Haymore and Holland law firm. And Colby, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce you to Faith Positive Nation today. Thanks for coming on, buddy.
Thank you, Dr. Fawcett. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. So what does a typical day look like for you as an attorney?
Goodness gracious. It's usually a whirlwind. Okay. I'm like knives some days, or putting out fires. But it varies from day to day. I do different type of practice areas.
Okay.
So I do criminal defense work. Or I work privately, but also I'm on the court appointed list. So that keeps me pretty busy with folks, and that's probably a predominant area of my practice. I do personal injury work as well, or medical malpractice, wrongful death, things like that. And I do guardian ad litem work, which is representing children in hearings, whether those are abuse and neglect cases to where a child unfortunately has to be removed from the home, or just simple custody and visitation type cases. Then I do some simple estate work. The
emphasis on simple, right? I understand. Those can get complicated.
Knowledge into that area.
Yeah, right.
And then I do some domestic work as well.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well,
So
man,
all over the place.
yeah, really. Well, I think they call it general law for a reason, right? Yeah. When you said guardian ad litem work, man, that would rip my heart out, just seeing children in certain situations. But also it would be a great opportunity to be Christ unto those children and to advocate their case, I would imagine. How does that affect you representing children?
Well, I think for me, and being a young attorney especially, I had no idea about the issues that especially young children face growing up. And I think we shield ourselves sometimes from some of those instances that children are involved in, or homes that children are in, that are just, it's really, really sad.
Yeah, we don't want to know by and large, do we?
Right, exactly. And so I think we kind of live in our, and not a criticism at all, an observation, but in our bubbles.
Yeah.
And so I can remember some of the first few cases I got that were abuse and neglect type cases involving children, that I just couldn't believe that those children were living in, conditions to where, I just couldn't believe it even existed in our county.
Yeah, and it was so far out of what your experience was, and frankly, from the experience of many, many, many Christians. And you're right, it's easy for us to insulate ourselves. So you're actually invited into man's inhumanity against man right there, and with children particularly being a much more sensitive case. How does your faith impact that work?
Well, what I normally try to do is my goal in those cases is, one, is to obviously get those children to a safe environment.
Okay.
Safe place, and to get them into homes, especially those foster homes where those folks that do that work are so great about opening their doors,
Mm-hmm.
being mentors to those children.
Mm-hmm.
So I evaluate the case. I determine whether or not, those children really need to be removed from mom and dad. But if they're older children and I can talk to them and get to have some interaction with them. I try to leave them in a better spot, obviously, than where I found them,
Mm.
and to give them some guidance as best that I can. To give them life advice is normally what I call it. And when I talk to clients, I'll say, listen, this isn't legal advice, life advice.
Yeah. We had David Matthews from Little Rock, Arkansas on here when Mike Van Branken and I interviewed him, and Mike and David are long-term friends. And, David said that same thing, that as an attorney doing domestic work, for instance, he's able to sit down with a couple and even say to them, just like you said, this is not legal. This is life. Let's think about what we're doing here and the implications of what we're doing. So you too find those places where you can be Christ.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And sometimes I'll say, and I try to not press my faith on those individuals,
Right.
but if they're receptive to it, or seem to indicate that they are a believer as well, I try to, at the very minimum, encourage them to pray about the situation they have going on, and I shouldn't say all those cases are necessarily bad cases. I do have cases where I serve as a guardian ad litem, to where I know that it's to help a child to get into a better position. I mean, such as, if a child can, I recently had one where there was going to be emancipation because the child just had a better situation lined up, even though the child was under 18. So it gave me the ability to have and that child, like I said, was under 18. She was, I think, 16 or so. And so she would understand me, and I could leave her with some encouraging advice, and that was a blessing for me.
Yeah, and you could really speak into her story and where she was at the time.
Yes, sir.
Wow, what a marvelous opportunity. So do you just kind of take those as they come along, or is that a part of your prayer life that you ask God to lead you in those kinds of situations?
I do. I have to ask for his guidance often. And especially, I think, more so probably not only those cases, but on my criminal defense work as well. To sit down I seek his guidance often in those instances of having serious conversations with individuals that are facing a lot of time. And also to have those conversations with their family. I find that to probably be one of the most difficult things to do.
To have that conversation with the family.
With the family.
Yeah.
Because usually that are calling because their loved one may be incarcerated. So they're calling me saying, hey, what
can you do?
Back. And they'll have children, and they're obviously torn up about the fact that they can't be there for their kids.
Yeah.
So those conversations become pretty difficult.
They are. So where is your touch point? Where's your anchor for dealing with those kinds of situations? Because those are anxious.
They are. And usually, like before I meet, I may say a little silent prayer within myself. I try to, as often as I can, whether I'm picking up the Bible, to read passages out of that. I really enjoy theology. I was a religion minor, Hampton, Sydney. And so really, really enjoy reading theological texts. And I normally try to keep one in my briefcase. I've got a down minute if I'm waiting, for instance, at the city jail or in the county where I practice a lot, and I have some time, I may pull that book out and read some in that. And that helps me kind of get focused and get prepared to have some of those difficult conversations.
Yeah. Do you have a daily routine of spiritual disciplines that you engage in? Some kind of morning routine, evening routine, something like that?
Well, I do have a morning routine. I'm a big workout guy. I enjoy going to the gym.
There you go.
And so I get up really early, get over to the gym. When I start my workout, I normally use YouTube, and I will listen to different sermons during my workout. Some more motivational, so I may listen to T.D. Jakes different days. I enjoy some of his sermons.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Now you can work out to some T.D. Jakes. He works out when he preaches, right?
Exactly. I enjoy Zig Ziglar,
Yes.
S.M. Lockridge, and Ray Vanderlaan is another that I listen to.
Okay.
So that's kind of where I get spiritually fed and get my days going.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, get spiritual and physical going. By the way, we've had Tom Ziglar, Zig Ziglar's son, who's now running the Ziglar Legacy Center here on our Faith Positive Radio podcast. So you can look that up on iTunes or check that out on your favorite podcast aggregator if you want to discover what life with Zig was really like. What an awesome man. So you got this morning routine where you're working your body and you're working your spirit as well so that you can be prepared to be Christ into these places. How did you decide, Colby, because I'm assuming you're relatively new to the practice of law?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Years.
How many years?
2.
2 years. Okay, great. Well, then this will be a great question because it's still fresh enough in your mind. How did you know God wanted you to be a lawyer? We refer to that as divine design. How did you know that that was God's divine design of you and a calling on your life?
Well, it was one of those things where I can remember as a kid, my dad loved watching Law and Order. There was an old show called The Practice.
Oh, yeah.
I remember being young and watching that with Dad.
Now, when you said old show, I thought you were going to say Perry Mason, because that would be an old show to me.
Well, look, we did watch Griffith, so I guess that had a little all in it.
Yeah.
I find myself quoting that show often. So I kind of got my first taste of the legal world. And then once I got out of high school, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I started at Hampton, Sydney, and became a history major with my religion minor, and started talking with my folks about where my life was headed, what I wanted to do. And they said, well, you've got a really good personality. You're very personable. Have you thought about law? Maybe that would be a good route. And I knew I didn't want to be a teacher because I thought, I've got this history degree. I'm not sure what I'm going to be able to do with it. And so what I did was I reached out to Brian Turpin, who's now Judge Turpin. And he was a local attorney practicing in Pennsylvania County, and he was nice enough to kind of take me under his wing and let me just tag along to see if law was the route I wanted to go down after.
So you shadowed him as your path of discernment.
And after watching him interact with his clients, and he is also a Christian and a man of faith, I realized that was my calling. Allowed me to give back to folks, to try to help them through their really difficult times. Whether it be helping them spiritually, which I'm always trying to do to encourage them even in those really, really dark, difficult moments, or just to help them with their legal matters to make them, feel a little better about their situation.
Well, it sounds to me like you've been called to minister to people, and these legal situations are your pulpit, if you will. That's your ministry field. That's a better way of putting it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I mean, it has given me a great opportunity. Like I said, I may not always mention Christ because I fill out how receptive my client may be to be that at all, but I certainly do my best to be an example for them and to, like I said, be an encouragement.
So when you sensed this was God's divine design and calling on your life to be an attorney, did you anticipate this many ministry opportunities being a part of it?
I did not. I didn't know what to expect, really. And though it prepares you to take the bar exam, to prepare you an attorney. So I didn't know really what to expect. I'm certainly thankful for the opportunities that I've had thus far.
How do you know when somebody's receptive? I mean, I'm hearing you say that you're seeking to incarnate Christ always in every situation. In some situations, you're more overt. That is, you might encourage them to pray or something like that. Other situations are more covert. You're practicing the presence of Christ with them without naming names, so to speak. How do you know the difference between those situations?
Normally, once I start talking to somebody, I will start out my conversations with, is it okay if I give you some maybe life advice?
So you ask permission.
I ask permission. And if they say, you have to say.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that I do that especially in situations where maybe it's a custody case and I've got two parents that are kind of at each other's throats about who's going to have the child for X amount of time.
Yeah.
And so and when they say sure, that kind of gives me that door to where I know, hey, they're going to be receptive to things I may can share with them. And I do the same thing though on any other client I may have, whether it's a criminal client or in a situation.
Yeah, if you sense that the door is open for that kind of conversation. Now, that carries with it a bit of responsibility. Okay, can I share with you some life advice? And somebody says yes, and then you gulp. What's going through your mind and your heart right then when they say, you discern that you can offer this life advice if they're willing? They're willing. Then what, Colby?
Normally, I try to say, okay, I think in my head, or try to think ahead, what is going to be their response to what I have to say? Okay,
so what am I going to say if they say yes?
Right, and then I think, okay, well, based on what I share with them, how will they respond? Are they going to be receptive to what I do say? Or will they get maybe defensive? And some of the things that I share may not always, they have biblical principles behind them.
Right.
And I find that, and especially going back to those custody cases, I end up using biblical examples in different things where I'm talking about, hey, we've got to get the child, you guys have to be fair with each other. You got to share. And I say a judge most time ends up being like Solomon in these cases. And so then it starts to dawn, and then I can tell that, hey, the stories are there, aware of the story, so share some more things together. So normally, like I said, I'm thinking ahead of how am I going to respond if they are defensive or if they're receptive?
Yeah. Well, that's immediately the story that ran through my mind when you're talking about a custody case and Solomon, bring me a sword, I'm going to cut this baby in half. That's a great story of wisdom. I can remember as a kid thinking that, walking through that story, oh no, he's going to kill a baby. But then the wisdom of that, and of course, that's what Solomon prayed for. So you prepare yourself for these situations each morning by filling yourself with the word and a spirit of truth through sermons and what have you. You prepare your body. Of course, we know the endorphins and oxytocin and other brain chemicals and things like that are stimulated by your exercise. So all of that really works together for good for your clients who are in there to get some legal kind of either advice or guidance, but who get something that carries them a lot further than the immediate moment.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I'm very impressed that one's so young. That's really great that one's so young. And I say young compared to the rest, to me, okay, would be that proactive in preparing yourself and being sensitive to, so that when those opportunities do arise, you can step right into them. You make it sound easy, but I know it's not. I don't want to make it sound easy at all.
It has been one of the more difficult probably things I've gone through in my life, just because of such a change. Going from being a student and studying all the time, and then all of a sudden you start the practice of law, and you're interacting with so many different people, trying to figure out how to deal with those folks that are going through, for them, their valleys and maybe some of their lowest valleys. So it becomes also, I have to take care of myself spiritually in order to deal with those folks, because it is, and we hear it often, but it is a stressful job because you develop a relationship with your clients. You get to know them really well because they're sharing with you their deepest, darkest secrets.
I know. And you've got to be sitting there sometimes going, even if that was true, I wouldn't have said it.
Right. But you want to also make them feel comfortable, and I always want them to feel comfortable, much like, you as a pastor, when folks come to you and say, this is what I've got going on in my life, can you, pray with me or help me get through it? I feel like we are in a somewhat similar situation.
Yeah, and with so much, of course, I'm not a pastor anymore, but I primarily do business coaching. But it's that same kind of relationship where people invite you in to very intimate relationships and share information with you that, who else do they talk with about this kind of stuff,
Right.
And particularly custody situations, is it really about the child? Is it what's best for the child? I am sure that if I were sitting where you're sitting, I would pray for discernment and wisdom like every 60 seconds.
Yes. Yes, sir. And you have to, because there are times in those cases where I'm not sure what the right answer. I'm not sure what, when you have those cases, going back to the garden ad litem, and it's a custody case, and I'm the one that makes a report to the court as to which parent I think is best, or how I think the visitation should be. That impacts the child, which is who I'm there for. I'm looking out for his or her interest. And I have two parents that are good parents that there's no real fault in either of them as parents. Yeah,
really. It's just the situation is such that they can't live together, I guess.
So those are those moments where, I think you lose some sleep and you're having to pray about them to say, Lord, help me, let your will be done. I always think about, Christ in the garden,
yes.
When he prays and says, let your will be done.
Yeah.
You have to pray.
Yeah. Well, you choose to, Colby Warren. You don't necessarily have to, because we all know people who, I'll just say it, they esteem themselves more highly perhaps than they should. And so what's really coming through to me from this Faith Positive Radio interview is how humble you are. Obviously highly gifted, spiritually sensitive, but with a huge dose of humility. Because you don't have to pray about those situations. You can let the power of that moment stoke your ego, and you go, I get to decide who does this. So how do you fight that battle? Because that's a real battle.
It is. Because there are times where I say, man, I know exactly what to do in this situation, but I try to pull the reins back a little bit and say, well, let me really take my time. And I find that to be the difficult thing with myself is I'll hear facts of a case and immediately want to jump to what's called being conclusory in law school.
Yes.
I immediately want to jump to that, but I have to pull myself back and say, well, am I making the right decision? If I have a parent who maybe is a little difficult to deal with, I can let that impact that child. So I have to take my feelings kind of out of it and say, okay, I've got to be objective here and really do what I think is going to be best for the child, despite, maybe a little bit of adversity coming from another parent towards me or the process that we're going through.
Yeah, the process oftentimes, because you just feel like you're a victim of the whole thing, and why am I here? And that parent could be the best parent or the better parent, but just it's an adversarial role because of that particular situation. Okay, but so how do you pull the reins back? How do you keep from jumping to conclusions, which is what you're talking about? How do you continue on the path of being a good detective to gather all the information?
Well, sometimes what I find is helpful for me is I have to put the case down and do something else. Whether it's, work on another case to get my mind off of those facts. Whether it's, and I use a lot of my time because I travel to Pittsylvania County. I also do work in Halifax County, which are both, Pittsylvania County from our office is about 20 or 30 minutes. And then Halifax is close to an hour. So I always look forward on my more stressful days, if I have to travel to those places, where I'll put in some music. And maybe I'm a big Johnny Cash fan. So,
yeah.
And that probably influenced some of my job decisions.
Folsom Prison Blues, huh?
but I find that I'll put in some of the music, and I enjoy his things because they are spiritual. Most all of his songs are, and so it's a time for me to reflect and kind of, cool the engines down a little bit and read.
Sure. Well, and of course, there's biblical precedents for that. Jesus was constantly slipping away, retreating, whether it was up in the mountains or whether it was taking a walk around a lake or a sea or something. He was constantly pulling back from the crowds so he could do exactly what you're talking about, communing with the Father and really gaining some spiritual strength and discipline that I think we all need. And that communion with Christ is just essential, but especially in your situation, because it involves real people in real situations, and they're tough.
They are.
Yeah. So how do you know when you got it right? When you made a decision and you say, God, this is the decision that you wanted?
It's hard to describe. I think you just kind of feel at peace. When I can go home and I can lay my head down and just say, man, that case panned out the way I think that, God wanted it to, or that was his will for that family. Or if it's a criminal case, that defendant, that is what God had planned, if they're a believer, planned for their life at this stage. Maybe
right.
What T.D. Jakes sometimes calls in his sermons a good hurt. I find myself using that phrase often with clients, is to say this may be a time in your life that it's a learning experience for you, and a time to kind of humble yourself and refocus yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because all things work together for good when we trust him, right?
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
that's beautiful. And that peace is so indescribable. It's, as Paul said, it's not like peace of the world. It's a peace that allows you to sleep at night. And that's a beautiful description. Colby Warren is practicing attorney with Haymore and Holland law firm in Danville, North Carolina. Listen to me. Chuck, you can go edit that out, make me sound good. In Danville, Virginia. And Faith Positive Nation always wants to know, Colby, about a favorite Bible verse or Bible passage from our guest. So, and I'm sure you've read the entire Bible, cover to cover, because you seem to be
cover to cover, all the comments, everything.
Yeah, you seem to be thorough in your study of Scripture, and you minored in religion at Hampden, Sydney. So I know there's 66 books. Faith Positive Nation knows that. So have you got one passage?
Yes, sir, I do. Probably my favorite passage comes from Paul, where he is describing that the Christian life is supposed to be like the Olympian, running, run so that you may obtain. And I think that is just a fantastic passage. And, I heard Ray Vanderlaan, who is a Jewish historian and knows a lot of the Hebrew text. One of his sermons actually kind of changed my view of that passage and made it my favorite. When he said, I always think about the Roman Colosseum. And he said, though maybe this isn't biblical, but he said, I always envision my family is up in the stands that has gone on before me, encouraging and not to take the Christian walk lightly.
Yes.
But always give it 100%.
Yeah. That's a great metaphor, and that your family's watching. I also like the one out of Hebrews. I think it's the 11th chapter where it talks about that great cloud of witnesses that's gone on before us. That's the cheering squad, right? They're cheering you on in your race as you seek to cast aside every sin and weight so that you keep your eyes on the prize and finish it like Jesus did. Man, Colby, this has been wonderful. It heartens me, especially to share the same zip code with you, that you as a Christian are making these kinds of decisions that impact our community in such a positive way. So thanks for being a faith positive attorney. We so appreciate that. Colby, is there an email address that somebody can reach out to you? Because people in Faith Positive Nation like to know each other in our community as a nation together. So is there an email address somebody can reach out to you?
Yes, sir. The best email address to get me at is Colby, and that's Colby, at HaymoreHollandLaw.com.
HaymoreHollandLaw.com. Okay, and if you're like Colby and you work out every morning and you're watching or listening to this podcast right now on a treadmill or lifting or something, it's in the episode copy. You don't have to stop and write it in your hand or something, okay? Colby Warren, thank you so much for the gift of your time, your wisdom, your spiritual sensitivity for one so young is highly impressive. So thank you for being you. May God continue to grow forth from you and in you all those wonderful fruits of the Spirit that we've had the privilege to experience today. Thank you, Colby, and God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Fawcett. Same to you.
Thanks for listening to Faith Positive Radio, the Christian business coaching conversation that increases your faith with greater joy at work so you love God and others more. Suggest guests and ask questions when you email Dr. Joey at info@getpositive.today. And be sure to get your free gift of the 5 positive business conversations to have today coaching program at getpositive.today. Until next time, may God bless you with everything your heart can hope for and more than your mind can imagine.